So the dimensions of this plane are truly awesome. And as I said, I am not contesting in any way that this is not a massive feat of engineering. It's an awesome plane. Everything about it is awesome in terms of size, and also what is really awesome is the alleged strength of these wings that can take all that weight when it's on the ground. I'm not really interested about it being in the air. I'm contesting whether or not those wings can take the weight on the ground. And I've not seen any tests, and I've looked through lots and lots of literature. I've not seen any tests, any practical demonstration that those wings can take that amount of weight. I've not seen any kind of hydrostatic testing of the wings in terms of pressure testing, filling them with water. I've commissioned chemical plants, and we always commission and test with water before we ever commit anything to those tanks. I've not seen anything at all where there's any test on those wings to show that they will hold that fuel and they will support the weight. There's evidence of them being lifted and pulled until they break, but nothing about weight testing them. That rings alarm bells to me. So we've got those dimensions I've shown you, and what I've done is I've extracted them into a simple diagram, and what I'm really interested in is this cantilever here. This wheel here forms a pivot point in that wing, and that is basically then a cantilever, and that cantilever is held in place by the structure here and the weight of the rest of the plane. Okay, and we've got the massive distance to the end of the wing of 110 feet, distance or 33.65 meters. We've got 19.5 meters to this Trent engine here, and 8.5 meters to this engine here. So when these weights act upon this pivot point, the torque or the moment will be a relationship of this distance by this weight acting here. So this second engine will add almost twice as much torque because it's twice as far away to this pivot point as this one. And then we've got to put the fuel in. So let's take a look at some of the weights. Firstly, this is our cantilever. So this cantilever, this piece of wing here, has to support all this weight, and it's tethered to the rest of the plane. So that is a fantastic cantilever. So let's have a look at, just to show where the fuel tanks are again. So here's the tanks in the wings. Here's the tank that's in the, I think there's 18 ton or something of fuel in the horizontal stabilizers at the back of the plane. But most of the fuel, 230 something ton of it, is in both these wings. There's about 117 ton or something in total in each wing. So what I've done here is to show the fuel system and the various tanks and their total capacity. So we can see we've got the inner tank, feed tank, mid tank, feed tank 1, outer tank. So we've got fuel held past that second engine, and that outer tank has something like 8.25 tons in it. So that's creating a big torque or moment on that wheel which is under here. So I've drawn a square round where the wheel is. I've estimated this tank, and I've said, because this is deeper here, this is greater than half, I've called it around a half of the total quantity of these two tanks here acting on that, past that wing wheel. So when we look at it, we've got outer tank 8.26 ton, feed tank 21.95 ton, mid tank 28.62 ton, and half of the inner plus the feed tank here, which is 30 tons. So that gives us total tonnage of fuel past that pivot point wheel under here of 88.83 ton. So that's official figures, so we can't really argue with that, but that's maximum fuel load the plane wouldn't be loaded with maximum loads for shorter flights. I am not saying that the wings can't support the weight of the fuel when in flight. I'm also not saying that those wings can't hold that amount of volume. They may well be able to. That is not my point of this video. I'm not saying that the engines are entirely powered by compressed air. I believe they use jet fuel, but nowhere near the official consumption figures. I don't believe the A380 wings can possibly support the immense weight of fuel plus engines when it's sitting on the ground with no lift to support those wings. Common sense would tell you that they would break under the strain. There's the pivot point. There's the first Trent engine, 6.25 tonne, acting as a moment over 8.57 metres. There's a second one, 6.25 tonne, acting over 19.5 metres. We've got 33.65 metres of cantilever there. And then we've got to add our fuel. So we've got the inner and feed tank, 30 tonne, the mid tank, 28.62 tonne, the feed tank, 21.95 tonne, and the outer tank of 8.26 tonne. So all that fuel is sitting in that wing when we've poured it in, or blasted it in, and the total weight of the engines and fuel is something like 101.33 tonnes. That's acting on that wing at that cantilever. That is an absolutely enormous weight and a massive torque. Okay, so if we look at the total moments, we can work out with the average distance to these points here, taking the centre of the fuel tanks. It works out fairly accurately. We've got the torque from the outer tank, the outer engine, the feed tank, the mid tank, the inner engine, and the inner tank and feed tank. And we've got a total there of around about 1200 tonne meters of torque. That's an enormous amount of torque for this flimsy wing cantilever to support. And in my view, that would just droop and the engines would crash into the ground and it would probably buckle and break. I'm going to use this as an example of weight loading on that wing, and basically its weight is 7.47 tonnes. You can see all its dimensions there, and I've scaled that when you see it on the aeroplane to about approximate scale. So the fuel that we're going to add to a full fuel load into that wing past that cantilever point is 88.83 tonne, and that's equivalent to basically 12 London buses. So what we're going to do is we're going to put effectively, this is if we're going to put that 88 tonne of fuel in there, that's equivalent to 12 London buses. We better put it on the other side, we don't want it falling over. Now, would you expect that wing not to budge at all and stay at the same profile? Would you expect it to bend and break off, bend a little bit, bend a lot? I think it's absolutely preposterous that that wing is not going to break and bend down. But let's have a look, because I've got some examples and some really good examples, some time lapses of this plane being fueled, and we'll see how much that wing does actually deflect. So I want to look at the fuel loading for each comparison I do. The A380 can fly for 18 hours on full tanks, theoretically, but for safety reasons it needs at least 1 hour of emergency fuel. So it can fly on long haul flights around about 17 hours maximum. So we can assume that's the maximum fuel loading will give us 17 hours of flight time. Now, if we know the flight times involved when I'm looking at various comparisons, we can work out the fuel loading. So I'm going to look at some photo comparisons, and I'm looking for wing droop when the fuel's added of A380s that are fueled for takeoff, and compare it with A380s with low fuel loads after landing. This is an A380 that's just landed. So it's gone to Rio de Janeiro and it's on a long haul flight, and you'd expect on landing for it to be fairly low on fuel. So this will give us our kind of empty profile. This is an A380 that's ready for takeoff, and its flight time is 12.5 hours. So the fuel loading based on that, based on the percentage of 17 hours, is approximately 70%. So this is an Air France Airbus. It's ready for takeoff at the end of the runway, and it's flying from Tokyo to Paris Charles de Gaulle. So I can get the profile from this and compare it. So before we do, let's look at what that 70% fuel loading is equivalent to. It's equivalent to 8.5 London buses. So the difference between the two profiles of those planes should have some, there should be some difference based on the fact we put all that weight on the wing of that aeroplane. So let's take a look. Okay, so what I've done is I've taken the two images and I've sized them identically. I've left all the aspect ratio unchanged. I don't need to change that, but I need to change the size of the image and align it. And I put some guidelines, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to overlay the fueled profile with the non-fueled profile. So let's take a look. So let's overlay the fueled and the non-fueled. So I'll try and keep it as close as I can. So there we go, look. Can you see that? Let's get those windows. There's a slight difference in the angle that we're looking at it. So the viewing height's slightly different. And maybe the angle is slightly different. But if we overlay the horizontal stabilizer and the engines, you can see the profile is almost identical. So there we go. There is obviously an angle difference the way we're looking at it, but look at those engines, look at the way they overlay. It's tilted down a little bit on the one image, but the wing profiles are virtually identical. So this is Sydney to Los Angeles flight. I've put the URL, I've put the name of the video is here, and the URL for the video is there. Flight time Sydney to Los Angeles is 14 hours. So we've got 82% fuel loading on this plane. So this was it at the end of the runway, ready for takeoff, and you can check this video out. Now, I struggled and struggled to find a photograph of an aeroplane that's just landed that's in exactly the same position. Fortunately, I found a video, and this is the video, and this is a screenshot from the video. And I've managed to stop the image when the plane is at virtually the same angle. The only difference is we're probably looking up at this aeroplane a little bit more, and we were looking down at the other one. So the information is here, YouTube video, this is the title, and this is a screenshot from it. So let's do what we've done with the other two, but first let's look at what 82% is. That's 10 London buses. So in this case we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So we've put effectively past that wing wheel, we've put enough fuel in to be the same as resting 10 London buses on that wing. So surely we will see some deflection. So here we go. I've lined the two images up. I've put in a guide mark, so that just helps me line it up. I've done the best to size them. Again, I'll stress I've not changed the aspect ratio at all. I've just changed the image size so that the two planes meet. So let's have a look at what happens when we overlay these two. Okay, so here we've got the fueled aeroplane, and here we've got the low fuel on just landed at Manchester Airport aeroplane. So let's look at the profiles. Okay, so here we go. The Look at that. Look at that. Absolutely spot on identical wing profile. The third time I've shown this time with getting on for maximum fuel loading. 10 London buses on added to that wing, past that wing wheel, and we've got exactly the same wing profile. Slight different angle, but without doubt. Look at that. Look at that. There's no fuel in those wings. There's no fuel in them. It just beggars common sense. It just makes no sense. This is a Houston to Frankfurt flight. Flight time 10 hours, so fuel loading is approximately 60%. So let's take a look at these images. So what I'm going to do again is I'm going to overlay the after refueling onto the before refueling and see if we've actually got any difference in wing profile. So let's take a look. So here we go. Let's take this lower image and put it over the other one. So here we go. Line it up. There we go. Spot on. Maybe a slight fraction. The engines are pretty much aligned. The wing sits virtually on top of the other one, look. It may have pitched down slightly at the front of the plane, but no difference at all. No difference. No deflection. So that's the fourth time. This one with a time lapse on the same plane rather than using two different ones like I've looked at before. Okay, so let's have a look at the refueling time lapse 2. This is Manchester to Dubai flight. This is 8 hours and fuel loading is approximately 50%. Okay, so there you have it. Did you see any movement of the wings at all? But we'll compare. This is before refueling, and you can see here, this is 3:18 out of the 9-minute video, and you can just see here the gantry or the lift going up to put the fuel pipes in. So that's just about to raise that lift, so that's before. And I'm going to compare it to this one where they're just lowering the lift. You can see it's later, 5:50. I've got before refueling and after one. I've made sure the images are the same size. I'll put some guides in to enable me to overlay. So I think I've used the flap mechanism covers here and the exhaust to the auxiliary power unit in the back of the plane. So let's overlay the two and see what we get. Now by overlaying the bottom image after refueling with the top image. So here we go. Let's get it pretty much spot on. Bingo. Can you see any difference? Look at that. There is no difference whatsoever. So that plane, we've effectively just put 6 London buses on each of those wings by adding the fuel or the equivalent of it, and we've got no change whatsoever in the profile. So there's 5, 2 time lapses, 3 still comparisons, no wing movement, no fuel in those wings. Okay, so my conclusions: no fuel in the wings. I can't see how that lightweight flexible wing can cantilever up to 1200 ton meters of fuel and engines. I believe there is central small fuel tank. Who knows, there could be a small tank each side on the very inner of those wings, and the fuel pipes that we see attached to the wing, run down the wings into the tanks in the middle. These planes use very, very little fuel, maybe a tenth of what they say. So we've got maybe 25 ton in a central tank rather than 250 ton around the wings. As soon as you start saying those engines use lots of fuel, you can make up whatever fuel weight you like. You can make the plane look heavier than it is. You can exaggerate the drag forces at altitude, and you can end up in this perpetuating, ever increasing weight of fuel. Now, if the plane's nowhere near as heavy, it doesn't carry a massive weight of fuel, the drag's fairly low at 38,000 feet, then the only fuel that that plane needs is to compensate any slight drag that it has. Uses very, very little jet fuel, and yes, jet engines do work by compressing air, but I believe they use a little bit of fuel to do it, and they're very, very efficient. And I don't believe the engines, the Trent 900 engines, weigh 6.25 ton. Possibly they only weigh a ton each, so we've only got 2 ton on each wing rather than the 12.5 ton we're meant to have. Motives, I think clearly money, because the more aviation fuel we are told these planes use, the greater the cost of the ticket. And also it reinforces the oil hoax, and if we look at numerology for that 3-letter word OIL, it adds up to 36 in English for 666. But that's an aside. What this video is about no jet fuel in these wings. I think I've proven that these wings are just not strong enough to take that amount of weight, and I've shown there's no profile changes whatsoever, quite conclusively.